very welcome that you attend our meeting on migration and demography. I add saying to that. My name is Jaap de Zwaan. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm the former director of Klingendaal. I was a full-time professor of European Union law at Rotterdam University, Erasmus University Rotterdam. And I'm an honorary board member. It's very honored to be called like that. And we have an excellent audience. And again, this panel is about migration, the new pact, where also the state secretary yesterday made some comments about, but also the demographic developments in Europe, let's put it that way. We have an excellent panel. So to my right is Eugenia Kopsidi. She is a lecturer and staff member of the European Law and Governance School of IPLO, European Public Law Organization, which is an international organization, in essence, Greece. And Eugenia represents the Greek member of TEPSA. Very welcome to her as well. Then next to her is Georgi Kistovani. He is a research director of the Policy and Management Consulting Group in Tbilisi, Georgia, and he is the Georgian member, Georgian representative of our Georgian member of TEPSA. Then the following guest is Jean-Louis de Brouwer, Director of the European Affairs Program of Egmont, the Royal Institute for International Relations in Brussels. No surprise, he represents the Belgian TEPSA member. And I know, Jean-Louis, when we were starting to discuss justice and home affairs after the entry into force of the Maastricht Treaty, which you might remember happened in '93, and at that time, there was not such a thing like a Directorate General Home Affairs or whatsoever. It was a tiny little, a tiny little office, something like that. But look, the importance these issues have got in the course of time. Finally, but not least, Vera Messing, and she is a research program professor at the Center of Social Sciences in Budapest and director of the Institute of Sociology in that Center of Social Sciences. Now, as I said, the discussion is about migration and asylum, but also about the demographic developments in Europe. I had to laugh a little bit when we listened to your state secretary, who made a fantastic speech. But when the topics became a little bit sensitive, he argued, well, let's focus on the areas where we do agree. And obvious migration is a little bit a kind of sensitive issue here in Budapest and all over Hungary. We all know that. And he hinted already at the externalization of asylum procedure, etc., etc. Anyway, there are still certain areas not properly covered, by the way, by the new pact on migration and asylum. As you know, discussions started immediately after the Syrian crisis, 2015-16, and it took us a while, isn't it? The Commission put forward a proposal already in 2016 to improve the policy as it was at that time. But in the end, so in December last year, February, April, we came to certain final conclusions which have been finalized and published now on the 22nd of May in the official journal, just to give you the references, because it's over 1,000 pages, all these texts, I think 10 or 11 legislative instruments. Well, the one who will be dealing with the new pact on migration and asylum is Eugenia. So she will start talking and, well, you are free to talk about a number of dimensions of the pact. Then afterwards, I would like to give the floor to Jean-Louis de Brouwer, because he will present the demographic, so the delicacy and the sensitiveness of the topic of the democratic developments in Europe from a general perspective in light of a big project Egmont has been dealing with a general perspective. And that means that after him, I will give the floor to Vera Messing, because she wants to focus on labor migration policy, more particularly in this country, Hungary. And that might be very interesting, because everybody knows that obviously illegal migration has a connection with legal migration in the end, to the extent that it may be that third country nationals who in the end do not have the right to stay in the European Union might be recruited in the context of legal migration. But there are also other flows of movement of persons, either from within the European Union or from third country national, and she will deal more particularly. The case in point is the labor migration policy in Hungary. Finally, but not least, Georgi Kistovani. He is from Georgia, as I mentioned, so he will give a sort of perspective as a candidate member state, but no, not only about the new developments in the European Union, but also with regard to the handling of applications for protection of Russian, Belarus asylum seekers and whatever. And I hope he will give us some insight in this kind of new policy, how to deal with them. Is it upon conditions? Is it temporary? How do you deal with it outside European Union? But certainly also Georgia, well, by and large, has to implement also the standards as we have developed them in the European Union. So I hope we have a very interesting panel. And without further ado, I give the floor to Eugenia to give her presentation about the new pact. And I think we have to respect the schedule slightly. So.
Thank you, Professor. I would like, first of all, to thank TEPSA and the host institution for World Economics for the kind invitation. Yep.
Hello, hello. You have to keep it very close to you.
Okay, no problem. So, the new migration pact, which has been discussed and negotiated for almost 8 years, is now a reality and will go into effect in 2 years from now, by mid-2026. This Wednesday, the European Commission presented a 10-part strategic plan intended to serve as a template for national implementation plans. So in my presentation, I will focus on some points that I consider important, controversial, and at the same time unclear regarding their implementation, and which have to do mainly with the so-called border procedure. This new pact aims to formalize mechanisms for managing migration flows that were implemented in a hasty manner during the so-called migration crisis since 2015, 2016. At the same time, one of its main objectives is to address chronic and structural dysfunctions in the European asylum system. The pact focuses more on asylum than on migration, on legal migration, with central objectives centered on safeguarding European borders. This is primarily done through mechanisms that discourage entry into European territory, and secondarily through the return of those who do not meet the required criteria. The first important point that I would like to highlight concerns the asylum procedure regulation, which is one of the cornerstones of the new pact. This regulation establishes common and uniform procedural rules of international protection within the EU, and it provides for extensive and, in some cases, mandatory use of the border procedure, which has been already in practice in Greece, for example, since the EU-Turkey agreement, which came into force in March 2016. The border procedure aims to rapidly evaluate an asylum application in order to decide if it is inadmissible or manifestly unfounded. Thus, requests from third country nationals who, after an initial screening process, which lasts up to 7 days, or with an additional 5 days allowed it in the event of massive influx, are deemed inadmissible or manifestly unfounded, will be subject to return procedure without having the right to enter the territory of the country. In addition, the use of the border procedure is mandatory for member states in specific cases. These cases are described with a series of vague, I would say, legal and non-legal concepts. For example, according to the regulation, if the applicant may for serious reason be considered a danger to the national security or public order of the member states, or if he's making an application merely to delay or frustrate the enforcement of an earlier or imminent decision resulting in his or her removal from the territory of a member state, the state is obliged to consider the application according to the border procedure. This means that there is a considerable discretion left to the member states, which may prove problematic, in my opinion. Another issue is that the border procedure is automatically activated when the applicant comes from a country where the rate of recognition of applications for international protection in the first instance, according to Eurostat data, is 20% or lower. This would divide migrants into two classes based on their nationality. And apart from the obvious risks for the rights of applicants, this provision for automatic recourse to an accelerated procedure with limited, of course, guarantees circumvents the basic principle of asylum law, which is the individualized examination of requests for international protection. Another point, which is very important in the new pact and concerns the border procedure, is the concept of safe third country. So the border procedure may be an option for member states if the applicant comes from a safe third country, a concept which is central to the new pact. This expands the reasons for refusing to examine the asylum request. And I explain myself. The safe third country rule allows member states to reject a request for international protection as manifestly unfounded or inadmissible if the applicant comes from or has passed through a country considered safe for them. The main problem here is that the decision about whether a country is safe for the applicant will not be made independently on a case-by-case basis, but based on their nationality according to national or according to European catalogues of safe third countries. The existence of such catalogues, when member states opt for them, will likely be to the detriment of applicants, as it creates a rebuttable presumption about the safety of specific countries for asylum seekers of specific nationalities, transferring to them the burden of proof of the risk they would face in case that will be sent back to that country. We had this problem in Greece, and it's still the case with Turkey. The Greek Supreme Court had decided in 2017 that Turkey is a safe third country. But 1 year ago, it decided to ask the ECJ about the same thing, and the decision is still pending because the situation in Turkey has changed since 2016. So this extensive use of the safe third country concept becomes a mechanism for speeding up returns, excessively restricting the right to asylum, since the request for international protection remains unexamined. Another point, which is an innovation of the pact and has to do with the border procedure also, is the creation of a legal fiction of non-entry, a mechanism that further limits the rights of asylum seekers. According to this legal fiction, a third country national who has entered the territory of a member state will be legally considered to be outside the country until the national authorities decide on his or her right to legal entry and stay by examining his request, according, of course, to the fast-track procedure. This concept, which is already in use in some European states, I mean, before the pact, essentially refers to a border legal space where the country exercises jurisdiction with the right to restrict the entry of third country nationals and by extensions the rights that traditionally derived from the status of an asylum seeker. In other words, the extended application of the rule of the legal fiction of non-entry at the EU's external borders is a legal construction that allows the prevention of entry to the territory without formally denying the right to request asylum. And last but not least, the extensive use of the border procedure leads to an increase in the cases and in the duration of detention, with reduced, of course, procedural and substantive guarantees. According to the new regulation, those who apply for asylum at the border can be detained until a decision is made on their application for up to 12 weeks, or in certain cases, 16 weeks. This is one period, but also before that, during the identification period and until the request for international protection is submitted, they will be also, of course, detained in closed structures for up to 7 days, extendable for another 5 days in crisis situation. The practical implementation is probably the problem, because if the screening procedure is not completed within the specific time, the applicant will continue to be detained until he can submit the asylum request. And if the application is rejected, the deportation or the return process begins, during which the applicant remains, of course, detained while considered not to be legally in the host state. And it is widely known, in Greece we know that very well, that the return decisions often cannot be executed for various reasons, either because the states, the countries of origin, they don't want to accept their nationals, or because of the various difficulties the national authorities face in implementing these relevant decisions. This practice leads, it's very likely that leads to the entrapment of migrants in a semi-illegal status in countries at the external borders of the European Union, as asylum requests will have been formally rejected, but returns will not be possible to be executed. So we have situation of de facto detentions. In the new pact, it's quite rare the use of the word detention. Instead, it is described as limitation of the freedom of movement for applicants for international protection in special structures. But it is actually a de facto detention which cannot be judicially challenged or reviewed, which is another factor that limits furthermore the rights of migrants before the national authorities. And in order to conclude, some believe that one of the positive aspects of the new pact is that stricter asylum rules, like the extended use of the border procedure, will speed up deportations and act as a deterrent. In that sense, the idea behind the new pact that fewer people will risk making the journey to Europe because their chances of being able to stay will be restricted doesn't seem very convincing. I personally believe that the effectiveness of the reform will very much depend on the willingness of the member states to collaborate, to implement the new rules properly, and address migration as a common European challenge, which required a unified approach. Thank you very much.
Evgaristo, Eugenia. Since the substance matter of this presentation will differ slightly, I think it is useful to open up already the possibility to put some questions, if you like. I mean, because the topics vary. If I may start, and then I'll come to Jim. You are hinting more particularly also on this principle of safe third country, which is of extreme importance. However, to what extent it's nevertheless a handicap or a defect that we do not as yet have a common list of safe third countries, because in light of the internal market, the open area without borders, etc., we are in need of common measures at the external border. However, it may be, and you refer to Turkey, rightly so, that there might be differences in the immigration officers, authorities in the several member states. To what extent do you think this might be a problem? And of course, it may that the Court of Justice, like in other instances as well, may help us to develop some criteria, but that doesn't mean that there is a concrete list of safe third countries.
Thank you. Yes, the safe third country rule is a concept that existed even before the migration crisis, but we didn't use it for many reasons. I think that a European catalogue is necessary, which will be mandatory for the member states. I think that the national catalogues, as I mentioned before, leave a very important margin of appreciation to the member states, which at least the Greek case is not a very good example, because since 2019, we have created a national catalogue which becomes larger and larger, including countries which do not have the profile of, countries for refugees, like, for example, Pakistan, Bangladesh, but also Somalia. Somalia, I mean, this is problematic. So the existence of a European uniform catalogue, mandatory for all the member states, would be a good, in my opinion, solution.
So for the audience, you need the microphone, Jim.
Thank you, Eugenia. I think you've given a brilliant presentation of the thing, and you rightly ask critical questions. I would, however, say that you have looked at it just from one side of the risk of asylum seekers or of those individuals, which is perfectly fine. I would, however, say that I also want us to look at it from our side. Why have we done this? And you sound a bit as if this is all fraud, it's all bad in a way because it could go badly. And I do agree with you. And on every individual point, you're right. But at the same time, my contention is that if we want over time to save the asylum system, we must, the true asylum seeking systems, we must have a system like that. Because as we've seen in the past, among those, even during the Syrian crisis, many of the people who came, we came from Maghreb and other places. And so I think it's just a matter of self-protection. And if I may also say so, that if you look at the political climate in Europe, I think, unfortunately, we do need something like that, because otherwise, I think our population will no longer accept asylum.
And then we turn to the other panelists, if you don't mind.
Hi, thank you very much. Martijn Pluim from IPA, European Institute of Public Administration. Before I used to work for ICMPD. 25 years ago, I wrote my thesis about the harmonization of European migration policies. So of course, I followed the file quite closely, and again, as Jim has said, very much aligned with many of the observations that you have, but also with what Jim has said. This was probably the last chance to really send a sign that, okay, there can be an agreement between 27 countries on one of the most sensitive topics that they can agree upon, and in a 1,136-page compilation of legislation. On your side, where do you see, let's say, also the positive parts? Because let's say the unequal treatment of asylum seekers by the different member states, the different recognition rates, for example. I mean, I don't focus now on asylum, but do you also see other areas where actually, okay, this is actually real progress in the area of migration and asylum governance management in the EU? Because I think that's also something, as Jim said, there is the negative part, and there will be serious issues which already are happening now at the European borders. We know that what's happening in North Africa, we know what happened in other areas. It's not more very beautiful, but maybe also to see where do we see real progress in the right direction, maybe from your perspective.
Sonia.
Oh, you have another question. Okay, then we take you on board. Oh, but then I would like to continue.
I'm not sure I need that, considering that. Yes.
Well, you have to put a microphone
for the stream. Hello. Hello, people online.
We are live streaming,
Wow. Altijd eyes on us. Yes, and I'm Sonia. I'm part of the TEPSA Secretariat. I know some of you and others don't. I don't. I wanted actually. Well, I had a meeting a few months ago at the council to have a presentation of the new migration pact with a lot of other think tanks, who also raise their concerns on the current situation, and they have done so for many months already. And it really felt a bit of a point where there was really not that dialogue anymore. But it's also came a little late, I guess, as the regulation has been already passed in several aspects. But I wanted to raise a point that also was raised at this discussion about the crisis situation that is embedded now in the Migration Pact, which I think also has raised quite a few concerns because of how arbitrary or sort of a leeway now it leaves to individual member states to enable the system. So I was wondering if you also want to share some insights about that, and if it's even something you've paid attention with, and also it's open to the other panelists if you have anything to add on that specific matter. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Eugenia.
Okay. Okay. So it's true that I have focused on the negative aspects, on the problematic aspects, which have to do more about the implementation by the member states and less about the rules as they are designed. The great positive thing is that finally we have an agreement, although we very well know that it's not an agreement made by all the 27 member states. Some of the member states have not voted for this pact, but yes, of course, it was not possible. Yes, it happens, of course. So I think that one of the positive and innovative ideas is the so-called solidarity mechanism, which is mandatory, but at the same time flexible. I think that it has we have to wait and see how much, for example, relocation will be implemented, which I think that it's the best solution. I'm also talking as a Greek who has seen a lot of people arriving in Greece, and there is no the capacity to host all these migrants. So yes, I think that relocation and all this solidarity mechanism could be a very positive aspect, even if there is also a financial aspect in this. About the crisis regulation, it was necessary in order to address and to foresee phenomena like the beginning of the migration crisis. It is also it has to do also with the border procedure. So the idea of preventing the entry, which is necessary, prevent the entry is a necessary strategic objective, but at the same time, I feel that we need more the creation of more legal pathways in order to see who can enter, who can work, who can offer, who has not a refugee profile in order to be returned. So I think that we are missing some legal rules regarding the legal routes for migration.
Well, I think that's an excellent bridge to the other dimension of our discussion about demographic developments, because everybody is aware of the fact that we are confronted with so-called agents, aging societies, several industrial sectors in need of labor force, wherever they come from, the tourist area, public health, and so forth and so further. So in that respect, I would like to turn now to Jean-Louis de Brouwer to explain a little bit about their experience as an institute. There is a second microphone at that side about demography.
Right. Does it work? Yeah. Okay, you hear me. Okay, I mean, as you open our session by referring to an entertainment-related example, I will do the same. Some of you might remember an old movie about the Woodstock Rock Festival. At a certain point in time, there is that's the opening of the second day. And the morning, and the entertainer comes on stage and says to the 300,000 audience, "Hi guys, you've had the heavy group yesterday evening, now you'll meet the morning maniac. So I'm going to behave like a morning maniac and start bombarding you with facts and figure." Yes, the EU 27 population is shrinking and aging. What does that mean? That the working age population will go down by 58 million people by 2100. That the old age dependency ratio would move from 33% in 2021 to 60% in 2100. That the EU share of the world population will go down from 6% in 2021 to 4% in 2100. That the proportion of 80 people in the age of 80 or above will move from 21% in 2021 to 31% in 2100. That the life expectation at birth, which is nowadays, last year at 81.5 years, from 81.3 in 2019, with very little impact of the pandemic on that. And by the way, everybody knows that the life expectancy of women is longer than the life expectancy of men. The fertility rate of the EU 27 was in 2020 in the average at 1.5, although the needed level is 2.1 for the simple renewal of the stock of the population. And of course, the situation is a bit uneven between member states. I mean, those with the highest fertility rate in 2020 were France and Romania, 1.8. Those with the lower fertility rate the same year were Italy and Spain, around 1.15. Of course, I mean, we could also see differences concerning the life expectation, which is longer in Spain and Italy and shorter in Latvia and Romania. Last figures, the number of healthy life years in 2021 was for women of around 64 years and for men of around 63. This has numerous impacts, and it has an impact on almost all the topics which are on the agenda of this conference. It has impact of human capital and competitiveness. It has impact on voting patterns. It has impact on fiscal policies. It has impact on geopolitical challenges. It has impact on cohesion policy, and it has impact of enlargement, because all enlargement have translated into massive movement population, either before or after. Bear in mind, for instance, that even after the 22nd of February 2022, Ukraine had lost 3 million of its inhabitants in terms of immigration. So that means, well, I'm a frequent reader of Politico, so therefore, but, what does that mean? It means that demography is at the same time everywhere and nowhere. If I take the example of the EU, there is no legal basis to do. There is no budget available, and there is no service in charge. By the way, this situation is common to most of the member states. If my information is correct, there is only one member state nowadays, i.e. Spain, which has a ministry dedicated to demography. By the way, it's very interesting that in Spain, demography is connected with regional development and regional planning. Croatia is considering the possibility to create such a department also. So demography is everywhere, but nowhere at the same time. This being said, there is a growing awareness that, as many people do refer, we are confronted with a third transition. We have the green transition, we have the digital transition, and we have indeed the demographic transition also. That translates into the European Council at its meeting in June 2023, asking the Commission to present a toolbox, which the Commission did in October 2023. This toolbox is based up, it's generally a toolbox. That is to say, there are no new recommendation or ID. The Commission has been simply listing a series of instruments which are available and which could be made use of by member states to meet demographic challenges according to the situation, the local situation. This toolbox is built around 4 pillars: reconciling the family aspiration and paid work, which is more or less corresponding to the policy which is now run by Hungary, for instance. The second pillar is about supporting younger generation. The third pillar is about empowering older generation. And there is a growing concern about the notion of longevity. What does that mean? And the fourth pillar is manage legal migration. This communication sends 2 signals. The first one, it reminds us that demography is an exclusive member state's competence. Yeah. But that some coordination is needed because it is closely related to the notion of level playing field or competitiveness inside the internal market. And at the same time, it stresses that migration is only one option to deal with the consequences of the demographic changes that I illustrated in the first part of my intervention. Now, a few words about the migration contribution. I think that we have to consider that we should consider 2 different patterns of migration according to the argument that you use to build a bridge between migration policies and the demographic and the demographic related situation. Either you use the demography argument. My population is aging and shrinking, and I need more migrants, for instance, to secure the balance of my social security. That means that in that case, you refer to settlement migration. That means that you refer to bringing people in with their families, settling, staying, probably becoming nationals at a certain point in time, but being there to stay. If you use exclusively the economic argument, then you refer to the mobility of professionals. And when I refer to professionals, I do not mean exclusively high-skilled professionals. It's all level of skill. Yeah. But you refer to some kind of circular migration. You bring people in to meet the needs of your labor market. They stay, they make money, they transfer money, the importance of remittances, to their country of origin, and then presumably at the end they go back. They go back. Polish plumber is an example of that. The syndrome of the Polish plumber. We have also to bear in mind the division of competences when it comes to the EU. I mean, the one and only thing that the EU can do is to set legal conditions for entry and stay, which can be enablers. But the member states, and this is enshrined in the treaty, are exclusively competent when it comes with numbers and profiles. So that means that those having to deal with economic or legal migration are not the Justice and Home Affairs Ministry. I mean, economic and then demography-related migration are determined or decided upon, the patterns are decided upon either by those in charge of the management of national labor market, which can be in many of our member states, the social partners, or by those presumably in charge of demography. But you've seen and you've heard that there are actually very few governments which equip themselves until now to deal with the demographic challenges. So that means also, you did not refer to that in your presentation, Eugenia, but when you look at the whole package of the Remigration Pact, there is also the willingness to include in this package a legal pathway. I think that it is a wrong approach. It is completely fraud, because I mean, the legal pathways, the opening of legal pathways has very little to do with migration policy as such. It has to do with economic and social policies. Yes. Yeah. So that's the reason why, for instance, are amongst those who have doubts about the effectiveness of the EU talent pool when they will see the light. So by way of concluding, because I really want not to overstretch the time which is allocated to me, I'm more and more tempted to encourage ourselves to go global when it comes to. I mean, yes, indeed, so-called competition of talents, we are not attracting talents, but compared with the United States and Canada, for instance. But of course, success depends also on numerous other factors than visa and labor policy. They depend on openness of the society, they depend on social aspects, they depend on immigration policy. By the way, I'm very struck by the fact that Norway has completely disappeared from the screen, from EU screen. So I think that we should, as EU, start thinking more and more global. Let me take an example. Yesterday, I heard several of the speakers. How does that mean? And asking assessment, both EU and member states. Third count, in the kind of win-win scenario, which that if we help for a certain number of challenges by changing. But at the same time, it would help to from having by creating added value there. And not simply cycling out the resources like we do on. What does that mean? That means that the countries where global gateway related investment will need their skills. Will need their skills. So that means that they will need their experts, and if they are there, they will ask infrastructure, which will help them to train the experts that they need. That is the perfect concept kind of balance and making the track. So we should start thinking terms and not kind of inbuilt concept. As I mentioned to you, I discovered this morning that a lot of people there will be regulation something from we shall see what they say. But they will be taking inspiration by thinking about in other parts of the world. LA, 2 years in the United States and Latin America. So we should start looking and putting on our agenda something which
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very interesting approach indeed, Jean-Louis. Thank you very much, because to that extent, there is linkage again with the asylum file. And yesterday in the recommendation of TEPSA, there was a reference to open partnership agreement with third countries. However, in light of what you were just arguing, we should not make use of these partnership agreements in order to create a kind of brain drain from these third countries to the European Union. That at least should not be our objective, isn't it? So thank you so much. Are there already some spontaneous questions? Yes, in the audience for you.
A very quick question. I think one area was left out, which is intra-European migration, which is basically a one-way flow for the active population from poorer to more developed countries. How do you view that?
Shall we take a second question, if you don't mind, Jean-Louis? I thought you were hinting. Okay. Are there any other questions? No? Okay, Jean-Louis.
No, but that you're absolutely right. That was I was referring to. I mean, when I took the example of the Polish plumber. I participated recently to a workshop when a very interesting report was presented by a Polish think tank about the overall impact of the EU enlargement since it took place 20 years ago. And that's exactly what happened. That's to say that indeed, before and after 2004, Poland witnessed a massive emigration. And then it has slightly to do with the Brexit, but not only with the Brexit. People came back because thanks to the growth, the economic growth in Poland, they understood that they could make the same level of money in Poland as they could do otherwise in other EU member states. So I'm afraid that such a phenomenon is happening and will happen. I mean, look at the situation of Romania and Bulgaria nowadays. I must say that I'm not very much aware of the situation in Hungary, for instance, but than I am about that. So it is happening systematically. It is so when they become EU members, then of course, I mean, we have to, be aware that it is the normal consequences of the free circulation, the forced freedom, which is the free circulation. People are there, and we witnessed that, for instance, at the time of the financial crisis and the consequences of the financial crisis. While for a few years, we've seen young Portuguese, young Greeks massively moving to other EU member states before returning. So that's, I'm afraid, okay, no, I'm not afraid. That's the normal consequences of, I would say, the opening of the internal market. By the way, it's very interesting also to spot that in his very famous report, Enrico Letta is, supporting the notion or promoting the so-called right to stay. That means to develop the cohesion policy in a way that indeed there is no incentive, there is no pull factor anymore for young people stranded in remote regions of the EU to move to other greener pastures. To be seen.
Well, just it makes me think there are already in the framework of the enlargement discussions reference to possibly to restrict even free movement of persons, which is in fact contrary to the idea what we are discussing here in this panel of aging society. We are in need of labor forces coming from elsewhere anyway. But there are already some politicians, perhaps more from the right-wing area, who are in favor of restricting free movement from within the EU once having been enlarged. Okay, we will see what that will bring about. Other questions for the moment, or shall we turn to the case in point? Yes, Vera.
Comment to that. So the Brexit was very much due to the enlargement and the internal from east to west.
With the consequences.
So I think we should not forget about how right-wing populists capitalize on migration, because it's a sensitive thing, because it is triggering nationalistic feelings, which still many of Europeans identify with.
Yeah, Jim?
The Brexit case is an interesting one. And you said migration. For me, internally, is not migration. So we should not confound the two. And in Britain, they have on purpose confounded the two. They talked about migration indiscriminately, whether it was from outside or free movement inside. Secondly, the British, of course, were the ones who who did not, all the other countries except Ireland and Britain took a 7-year period to make things smoothly. And the British said, we don't need it. And then they turn around later on and say it's outrageous what the union has done to us.
Aware of these days. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. But we can come back to this topic, but we will turn now to Hungary, Hungarian labor migration policy. You have the floor with a couple of slides.
Yeah,
I hope it functions.
I think slides. I will look at them because nobody uses slides, so that's just
Okay. So it's up to you.
Thank
You're free.
Or do you need the slides? But then I have to stand.
Slides are also live stream. Able to follow. I don't know what the audience is. Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
So I'm going. So my name is Vera Messing. Thank you very much for the introduction. And you might remember that I'm a sociologist. So I'm not a political scientist. I'm not international relations. So I come from a quite different. I bring in a different perspective, but I hope it will kind of broaden our views. So I will start my at the time. So my argument. So I will bring the case of Hungary because I think it's an extreme case. Does it work? I think it's an extreme case, but it's still maybe useful to look at it because it brings out all the problems, difficulties of migration and migration policies in the EU, or at least many of them. So the title is Dissonance of Migration Politics and Migration Policy in Hungary. And my main argument is that there is a significant dissonance between what the Hungarian government talks and tells and what it does. And probably you will know much more about about the discourses and the politics that the Hungarian government pursues, because it's very loud and very extreme, and you will know much less about what it actually does, which is quite contradictory. But a short few facts about the history, because I think it is important, and especially if you speak about accession, it is quite relevant for other accession countries as well. So migration has been very, very minor in Hungary and in Central East European countries in general, and probably also in the accession countries. It's been like 2-3% of the population, which is, I mean, it's not even to compare with other EU member states. So that's a fact that we have to know about. And even more because the dominant majority of immigrants come from neighboring countries, and many of them are Hungarian ethnic origin. So migration has not been an issue in Hungary, but also in other Central Eastern European countries, because culturally, racially, ethnically, they are very close to the mainstream population. There has been a shock, but I'm putting it into cover of quotation marks, thank you, of the refugee crisis, which I again put into a quotation mark in 2015, when really a large number, like over 100,000 people crossed Hungary, and they became very, very visible. But actually the shock was due to the government's capitalizing on those images and on the fear that it brought to the population. There is a very good theory by my colleagues Gero and Sheik. They call it the moral panic button, meaning that the Hungarian government not only built a moral panic about migration back then, but also it used it as a button, and every time there was something which was politically sensitive or crucial in Hungary, they started to push this migration button. And this is going on still until today. In the European Parliament election, one of the key campaign words was no migration.
If I may allow, your reference Slovakia, Serbia, Romania, is that not also a reference to the history of Hungary in a way?
Yeah, but Central East Europe has this very complex history. I'm not going. I didn't think to go into the history, but yeah, it's
I mean,
Of course, there is a very complex history and a very diverse population in all of these countries, and very big diversity of borders moving back and forth, and populations changing, and most of the time not very nice history. But but that's very much characteristic of the whole region, I would say, but also to accession countries. So if we think about the Ukraine, it's the same story, or the ex-USSR country. Okay, so these are just some charts showing what I'm trying to say, that migration has been very small, from 20 to 60,000 people. The red is a correction, because in 2010 or 2011, there was a law that allowed Hungarian ethnics become in neighboring countries to become Hungarian citizens. So they migrated as citizens, and so it's a corrected. But anyway, did not surpass 60,000 people, which is like Hungary's 10 million. So it's very small, still very small. And if we look at the composition, you can't see it, but basically up until the yellow line, or even further than that, it's all Europe and neighboring countries, and only the dark ones are from third countries. So third country nationals, which might be culturally, racially different, and kind of in need of integration policies, are very, very super minor. Okay. Okay, and some other basic facts continued in the history. So there is a continued fierce anti-immigrant fear campaign by the government since 2015. It has been very nicely described by many scholars. I can give you many references to that. And as a result, there is an increased xenophobia and anxiety about immigrants among Hungarian population. And this is even more characteristics in places where there are no migrants and have never been migrants. So the context theory really applies a lot. And then in 2022, an outbreak of the war in the Ukraine that we are unfortunately well aware of, there was a new wave of asylum seekers from the Ukraine. And interestingly, the discourse of the Hungarian government changed completely. So Hungarian government first didn't say anything and then became much more accepting and supporting of the Ukrainian immigrants. We have analysis of these discourses, but there was a high number of Ukrainians crossing towards Hungary, but very, very low number of people who actually asked for asylum. I think about 40,000. While crossing, it's over, I don't know, several. It's over 1 million who, even 4 million that crossed the border.
Oh, yeah,
So they continued. They were clever, smart enough not to see. And then what made a turn in the migration policies, but not politics, is that reality hit the fan for the Hungarian government, and the huge lack of labor force appeared. So in Hungary, I think there was a presentation how Hungarian government tried to invite foreign investment in the automotive industry, especially in the battery industry, supporting heavily this kind of industries to come and settle in Hungary, but there was no labor force available because there was a large share of outgoing migration, especially the well-educated and the young, and no labor force for these factories. So this is what I call a illiberal immigration regime, a dissonance of migration politics and policies. So migration politics remains very hostile to immigrants, especially to asylum seekers in general. Also discursively, there is a continued anti-immigrant propaganda. Even in the 2024 European Parliament elections, one of the key campaign words was no migration, no gender, no war. Anyway, no migration. That was one of the keywords in English for Hungarian. Yeah. And on the EU level, there is a continued infringement of European Union's asylum procedures, migration framework, and this kind of playing out or playing against the
You are well aware of the judgment of yesterday? Of the Court of
yes,
Justice?
yes, and I'm
Penalty payment. And
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. It's very exciting what they will
Yeah.
do about it. Orban yesterday actually said that we will find a way that it hurts them more than us.
Yeah.
that was his
Yeah.
comment on the decision. But still,
That's the decision of yesterday.
yeah, yesterday there was a decision saying that Hungary is fine with a massive amount, 200 million euros, for the continued infringement of asylum. But on the other hand, which is less visible, there is a very significant migration policy, a very selective migration policy, and a significantly increasing number of immigrants. There are two groups of immigrants that are not only welcomed, but also supported, financially supported. And one are international students. There is a Stipendium Hungaricum scholarship schemes that invites and pays fellowship for third country national students from specific friendly countries, including China, but not only China, ex-USSR countries, but also, for example, Mexico. There are over several I think 30, 40,000 students paid by the Hungarian government studying in Hungarian. Yeah. Yeah. 30, 40. I'm not sure, but I have to check the number. Actually, any of those who are of us who are teaching in Hungarian universities face the problem of very international students coming from all over around the world and having very different knowledge, and we have to deal with that. And very different knowledge of English, but also other knowledge. Oh, it's quite challenging.
Vera, if I may allow, selective migration policy, to what extent the Hungarian authorities recognize the problems of immigration, of highly
skilled I will have my final comment on that.
Sorry.
But the other group, which is even much more larger and increasing very significantly, are the guest workers invited for the battery industry and automotive industry. It's a whole managed migration done through temporary agencies to which the Hungarian government has very direct personal ownerships linkages. So it's basically managed by the Hungarian government, and as a result, there is a chart. I'm not sure whether you can see it because this lamp would never go off. Those lamps go off, but this never. So anyway, by now there are 120 foreign employees through these temporary agencies coming to Hungarian factories, which is pretty large in Hungarian terms. If you go back to the first slide, there has been the largest number of all immigrants have been, or foreigners have been 60,000. There are, here number 35,000 students, but no refugees, practically no refugees. And I can talk about this guest worker laws, which does not allow family reunification. And also it's pretty interesting. So I can relate to you. This is the choice of inviting temporary people for a certain amount of time, for certain types of jobs, making sure they return, no families accepted, no integration needed, no integration built. But since there has been a very fierce anti-immigrant propaganda fear campaign going on for almost 10 years, 9 years by now, people in localities are very, very afraid of immigrants. I mean, once of a sudden, several thousand people in a small township appear who are racially different, don't speak the language, and locally they don't speak English, and they are just scared to death. And these guest workers needs to be relocated to places outside of the township and totally segregated. So it's really crazy. It's really crazy. And this is what makes the economy work, but I'm not sure how long it will make. And one more comment to the family you were saying about the Hungarian government addressing the demographic crisis through the family policies and family and work-life balance policies. They didn't work out. So a lot of money spent on that, but basically demography has not changed at all.
And Vera, the Ukrainians are included in your figures, TCN?
Yeah, the refugees are Ukrainians.
Displaced.
Yeah, I mean, in Hungary, I'm not going to go into details. I thought there are no third country national refugees allowed. So the fine Hungary was given is because after there was a resolution that these centers on the borders, which were basically prisons, had to be dissolved. The solution was that, okay, refugees can enter if they primarily ask on the Kiev or the Serbian, the Belgrade embassy in person, submit a request to be allowed to enter to ask for residence, which means nobody can enter. Nobody. I mean, who would go to Kiev or Belgrade to the embassy to ask for a permission to enter to ask for asylum? So these are all Ukrainians. Yeah, that's why we have refugees at all.
But the Ukrainians are not included in the 100.
They are included in there. So many Ukrainians are Hungarian citizens because of the citizenship. Other Ukrainians came as refugees and asked for asylum, but that's not too much. And they are also foreign employees. But they have been coming to Hungary and working for in Hungary, this kind of circular migrants for many years, much before the war broke out. So they can be in all three, and there are students also. So they can be in all of these categories. Okay, I think that's all.
You have to take the microphone, sorry.
Okay, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Just because it relates to the last slide. So that's why I'm asking, what about the Ukrainians who are under temporary protection?
Protection.
That was the question, actually, I think
Yeah.
you asked. Those are the refugees, 7,500.
Yeah, I had the impression that's a bit little. It's too little, perhaps, because this place, the temporary protected Ukrainian national, are they included in that? I think there might be many more, but I'm not sure. Okay. And there was another question in the back. Yes, please. And then we turn to Georgia.
Good morning. My name is Ani, and I'm a former Stipendium Hungarium scholarship student. Thank you. Very thankful, actually. And on part of that, I'm also a youth who is also working in social projects and sustainable development. My question to Vera is to understand if she has any insights as to how these, let's say, guest workers will be integrated in the country, if at all, or if there is going to be any system that's going to be similar to caliphate systems from Middle Eastern countries like Qatar, where guest workers are basically trapped in the country, made use of, exploited, and then sent back, if at all. So is that the case that we have, or do we have any insights into this?
Thank you very much for the question. I think you hit the point. It's quite novel. So the system is like maybe 2 years old. So we still don't know how it's gonna work out. I would say between the two, there is no integration foreseen, no efforts for integration. Many of the guest workers are segregated also in their residences. And they are exploited to a certain extent in terms of not being allowed to reunite with their families. In terms of where they live, it's very poor conditions. But I think they are paid. Their pay is not lower than the minimum. It's even higher. It's even higher than the minimum wage. So in these terms, they are not exploited the same way they are in Qatar. And they are also not trapped in the sense that there is nothing that prevents them from returning. But certainly it's a temporary, and it's meant to be temporary. That's why it's not allowed to reunite with the family here. So but I have submitted several proposals to study this phenomenon because this is very new. But I don't know of any actual research that has been focused. Actually, there is, but it's more from the industry side. It's an ugly system. It's a pretty ugly system, I would say. Nationalities are all very, very varied. Let me think. So one of the arguments they are saying is that also look at the vocabulary. That's very important. What vocabulary is used for asylum seekers, refugees? They are called illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants.
Welcome to the illegal immigrants.
So that's the term used for asylum seekers and refugees. For work-related migration managed by the government through temporary work agencies or employment agencies, they are called guest workers. Okay, so both elements of the words have very different connotations. So it's very important to look at the word the words used or the vocabulary.
And as we know, integration is not a competence for the European Union. It's all in the area of national competence.
So what countries they come from? So one of the arguments is that they are good people because they are Christian. So they come from the Philippines. So it's basically very much dependent on contracts between certain countries and Hungary. Philippines is one, and then ex-Soviet countries like Kyrgyzstan, which is not so much Christian, but we don't say that. Kyrgyzstan. The Turk Tanács. You're right. I didn't think about that. Yeah, so Hungary has a new allyship, not so new allyship with the Turk committee. So they come from those countries, and Vietnam as a traditional partner, but also India. A lot of Indian, almost 10,000 Indians. They come. Many of them come through what's the big company?
Okay, let's leave it at that. Very
Okay.
interesting, all these contradictions in national context. Thank you so much. I turn to the candidate member states perspective of Georgia. I'm sorry, we have to allow the floor to our friend from Tbilisi.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting. And I will talk from the perspective of a candidate country like Georgia. And of course, I can generalize, but I assume there are similarities in other candidate countries related issues on migration. But first thing, what I want to say is that during this discussion, it's obvious that migration is seen in European Union and in member states as a problem. And my argument would be that candidate countries like Georgia might face more severe issues or challenges related to migration than even member states. And I will try to showcase this during my short speech. During the discussion, I will talk separately about issues immigration and immigration because they are both relevant. And if you talk only just about migration, maybe it's possible to miss a point. So first, I think that Georgia is a very interesting case for observing migration processes. Let me bring some facts and figures first. So Georgia has 3.7 million population. And in the last 12 years, approximately 300,000 Georgians or Georgian citizens left Georgia. And it's about 9% of the population. I think it's huge. But parallelly, approximately 260,000 persons, foreigners, immigrated into Georgia, which is around 7% of the population. So there are two parallel processes which are taking place and which are making migration issues in Georgia quite peculiar and at the same time challenging. First, about triggers. Related to immigration, I would say there are a few triggers. First of all, it's started with association agreement with the EU, then a visa liberalization process, and parallelly, there is a process of building a diaspora in the US. So those two, that's why I would say that main destinations for Georgian immigrants is EU and USA. And related to immigration, the main trigger of this expansion was war in Ukraine and Russian aggression in Ukraine, and around 110,000 persons immigrated after 2022 into Georgia, and the majority is from Russia. It's around 75,000 Russians, but also Ukrainians and people from Belarus. When we talk about root causes of these processes related to immigration. It's first of all increased cost of living in Georgia. And at the same time, the opportunities that Georgians have in Europe and in the US. And related to immigration, I would say it's first of all very liberal visa policy that Georgia has at this moment. We talked about asylum seekers in Georgia, especially from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And I checked, and the numbers are symbolic, basically. It's not more than, I guess, 500 persons in the last 2 years. And when I'm talking about liberal visa policy, it means that basically more than 100 countries have visa-free regime for Georgia. If you enter Georgia, you can have 1 year stay where you don't need to get a work permit. And there is also a peculiar way of return back to Georgia. You have to leave the country or leave the border for 1 hour and you can return back. And then another 1 year starts. So it is quite unique and very liberal one. And Russians are getting used to this opportunity, especially. And so that's why this issue of asylum seekers is a non-issue for Georgia, because people who are in Georgia from abroad, all of them, and also it's very easy to get work permit if you're not under this visa-free regime countries, because if you have a contract in Georgia, you can get this work permit without any problem. Shortly about consequences. Related to immigration, we are witnessing in Georgia at this point huge labor shortages of labor force and professionals. In almost every business survey, the first problem that businesses are facing is Georgia, and Georgia is labor shortage. And parallelly, I would say another consequence is huge reliance on money transfers or remittances. It's varies between 10 and 13% of GDP, and it's quite big. And related to immigration, the consequences is increased prices for property and increased price of living, especially the immigration from Russia and Belarus, because they were the people who immigrated were well educated, high earners, and the price is at least doubled for property and rents in Georgia, and also in at least in Tbilisi, which is a capital city of Georgia, the prices for everything increased a lot. And we faced during those 2 years double-digit inflation, which was caused basically through those elements. And also it was very interesting that even it had the very positive short-term effects on economic growth in Georgia. So the Ministry of Finance said that around 3% of economic growth in Georgia in 2022 and 2023 was caused through immigration effects of Russians and people from Belarus, especially Russian Belarus that came to Georgia. At the same time, consequences of immigration is partially balancing of labor shortage caused through immigration in Georgia. And now in Georgia, we are also witnessing still low numbers, but witnessing immigration from China and India. And I would say that the overarching consequence of this parallel processes is that the dependence of Georgia on migration is becoming huge, both because of emigration and money transfers, but because immigration and reliance on immigrants who replace Georgians who immigrate. Very briefly about challenges here is that I checked this sixth report under the visa suspension mechanism of 2023, and there is underlined that Georgia faces challenges from the perspective of unfounded asylum applications and irregular stays in EU member states. Because as we all understand, the large number of Georgians who are emigrating to EU are illegal immigrants in this regard. I checked the numbers from 2022, and the number of Georgians seeking asylum in EU was record high with 28,000 people, which is around 1% of Georgian population. And among the 5 EU candidate countries, Georgia, Moldova, Bosnia, Georgia, North Macedonia, and Albania, Georgia, since 2021, stood out with the highest percentage of the population applying for asylum in EU. At the same time, this report provides some recommendations that Georgia should align its visa policy with the EU list of visa-required third countries. In particular with regard to countries presenting irregular migration or security risk to the EU. And this is a problem for Georgia for obvious reasons, because the main trigger of immigration is this, let's say, liberal visa policy. And at the same time, in order to align with EU requirements, sooner or later we need to change things. And this might affect Georgian economy immensely as well. Very interesting observation we made is that concerning trend for the future of Georgia is the growth in the number of families emigrating. Because before it was mainly labor immigration, people left Georgia, worked in Poland or other European countries, but mostly returned back. And now the phenomenon is evident that in the there's a huge number of pupils leaving schools in Georgia. And this is kind of evidence that people are emigrating with families. And it means that the immigration took another pattern than it was before. Very interesting, but also concerning issue is the number of Russians in Georgia at this point. As I said, before the war, it was minimal. Majority of ethnically Russian Georgians even left Georgia, but the number of Russians were low. And now, just based on the immigration started in 2022, 3% of the Georgian population consists of Russians. And it has became a kind of a solid minority, and one day it might become an issue of national security as well. We know similar cases in the neighboring countries of Russia, how Russia leveraged this for their political interests. And another challenge which I want to highlight is also a brain drain. What we are observing in Georgia now is that the number of people qualified and high qualified people are emigrating. This might be a long-term problem for Georgian economy as well. Finally, what I want to say that now we are witnessing quite turbulent period of time in Georgia because of some issues related to democratic backsliding, and the current situation might even worsen in a sense that if the democratic situation worsens in Georgia, possibly the level of immigration of high-skilled people will even increase. So I think that the risks are quite huge. So this was a short overview on the situation in Georgia. Of course, I don't want to generalize and say the same situation is other candidate countries, but what I want to say and what my argument is that not only Europe faces kind of a migration crisis, but also neighborhood of Europe is quite affected in different ways. And I think Georgian case is one of the interesting cases in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Georgie. I was wondering, when once applying family reunification or reception of Russian asylum seekers, do you already apply or have in mind already the EU standards in that respect, or is it your proper national approach which is still being practiced?
Thank you very much. What I know for sure that there was a huge, large number of technical assistance programs in Georgia, financed through European Commission, and where the main issue was to harmonize the standards of border management and the application processes. And I would say that in this regard, Georgian government tries to harmonize and synchronize the processes taking place in European Union with the processes taking place in Georgia.
And there are certain connections with the comprehensive free trade.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so
part of it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Vera and Jean-Louis, I don't know, in the audience, shall we first take the audience? Martijn, if you want to come in. Upon the condition.
Thank you. Could you maybe say a bit more about the challenges related to integration? I mean, the sudden arrival of such large numbers, both of, you have people from neighboring countries, but also from other countries. I know a few years ago when I was in Tbilisi, there was some protest against all the shisha bars on the street. How is the Georgian population and the Georgian government able to support integration of such large increase of migration?
Very good question, because it's a very difficult question. I would say on a government level, there is no coherent policy in this regard. Regarding the attitude of the population, it's mixed. In 2022, it was very interesting, and I can tell shortly about this, that basically the data on immigration and country entries was quite transparent. And after it was obvious that the number of people from Russia is huge that are coming to Georgia, Ministry of Internal Affairs even stopped to publishing certain numbers because it became a huge political topic. And so they decided not to publish. And I remember in 2022, it was almost impossible by the end of the year to know the certain number, how many people from Russia immigrated to Georgia, because it was huge. But anecdotal evidence showed a lot, because in Tbilisi, it was obvious, you hear everywhere Russian language. And the same was in Batumi, which is the second largest city in Georgia. This is very interesting case, and I would refer to previous presentation, because basically the current Georgian government is very much a national pride, identity, but at the same time, the reliance on immigration is so huge because of labor shortages and because of other elements, foreign students as well in Georgia. It's also a big issue and big source of income for higher education institutions, that it is tolerated a lot. So I would say here are some similarities with Hungary. There are some similarities in general in Georgia and Hungary in the recent period of time, but here are also some similarities that that we are at the same time tolerating immigration quite well, and at the same time the politics is very much national, and so it's mixed. And sorry to add one thing, and if there are some let's say protests or something like that, they are most likely kind of orchestrated through some political groups rather than organic, I would say.
Wonderful. Everybody would like to go. Perhaps, but Vera and Jean-Louis, and that's, I think, where I would like to, and perhaps for Jean-Louis, you mentioned in this beginning of your presentation about, well, this is a different, well, in the course of your presentation, this is a different discussion, different approach. What could the European Union do to get more grip on this subsidiary part of the migration problem? What can we do? How can we organize ourselves? But let's start with Vera, and then Jean-Louis, and then we put it. I'll take the microphone. Sorry. Yes. You have to be very.
I'm trying to look at the attitude data on Georgia immigration attitudes, but I still need some time. But what I want to say is that although Georgia is a small country, but I think it's very significant in terms of as an example or a case of accessing countries and the issue of immigration. And the one important question, but I almost sure I know the answer, how immigrants are distributed geographically. I guess most of them are in Tbilisi, right? And but the bigger question is how the Russian, because they are the largest, and I do agree with you that it might cause a security problem, especially if there is a nationalistic government taking over in Georgia. Whether they are living segregated or they integrate, and whether Georgia has, but you already answered the question, any policies on how to manage their stay and integration, and because I think that's a key issue.
Very brief, I observe no real policy in this regard. They are living quite segregated, I would say. In Tbilisi, they live in certain districts of the city. They open their own cafes, restaurants, salon. It's very much a kind of little Moscow in Tbilisi, like that. So, if I can say so.
Yes, very quickly answering your question and 2-3 comments, having listened very carefully to this interesting conversation with colleagues. First of all, that's the answer to your question. It's very interesting to see how the incoming Hungarian presidency wants to tackle the demography priority, the 7th priority. Actually, what they will do is to have on the agenda of each and every informal council meeting, there are 6 or 7 informal council meetings which are foreseen during the next semester, one demography-related item. So they show that it's indeed demography, which is at the same time everywhere and nowhere. One way to tackle this, and I'm trying to instill this idea, would be to replicate what member states did 20 years ago when it was about integration. There was a push from some number of member states to have integration-related issue on the agenda of the EU. The Commission answer was exactly the one that you put forward earlier, but there is no legal basis to do that. We have absolutely no comment. And some member states took the challenge and said, okay, we are going to do it ourselves. And they convinced themselves to appoint one national contact point in each member state. And they entered into a new process where these national contact points were meeting on a regular basis. Then they escalated that at ministerial level. And that is a process that indeed could be triggered under the Hungarian presidency. First comment. Second comment about what you said. Some would say schizophrenia, some others would say hypocrisy when it comes to migration. This is not at all an Hungarian syndrome. Let me take 2 examples at EU level. The member states are in the process of finalizing the strategic agenda. I haven't seen the latest version, but what was interesting is that in the negotiating box that was used by the President of the European Council, there was on one end an immigration box, which was entirely security driven. It's about control. And there was one reference under the competitiveness chapter to indeed the word migration wasn't the negotiating box, but I don't know if it's going to survive in the final version of the strategic agenda to the need to attract guest workers to meet the skills challenge at EU. This is applicable to governments, but it is also applicable to social partners. One of the highlights of the almost done Belgian presidency was the so-called relaunch of the social dialogue at European level. So there was a summit in the early weeks of the presidency, the so-called Val-Duchesse summit, which adopted a communique signed by the social partners. There is indeed a reference to the need to attract workforce on the road, but they did not use the I word. They used the word workers from abroad. The word immigration does not appear in that common statement of the social partner. Last but not least, and that's also related to your questions concerning the way these economic migrants are dealt with in a country like Hungary. We should not underestimate the impact of technological connectivity to modern migration, to migration in the 21st century. Modern migrants are connected people. They stay connected with their community of origin. They stay connected with their local culture. They have access through satellite television to the local channels. They know day by day, hours by hour, what's happening in their own country. which is a completely new challenges when it comes to integration. They can have their little Moscow, their little Saigon, where they are. They don't need, I mean, to be. I was very aware of that because I was involved in a kind of research project because Belgium celebrated recently the 60th anniversary of the Belgo-Moroccan labor migration agreement. When people were coming from Morocco 60 years ago in Belgium, they were losing every contact with their families. I mean, they were allowed to give 1 or 2 phone calls a month. With a bit of luck, they were getting some letters from their family. So they were cut from their cultural and community ties. This is not the case anymore at all. I mean, they are completely connected, including by new ways to try to transfer remittances. And of course, I mean, I think that when I was pleading for us going global thinking migration, we should also include this dimension. I mean, okay, I mean, I did not refer to the new fashionable concept of digital nomad, but just let me remind, by way of conclusion, one anecdote. 20 years ago, Germany made a big splash and advertising. We are going to give 50,000 visas for Indian IT specialists because we badly need them. It took 2 weeks to Lufthansa to go public and announce that they were delocalizing their accounting service to Mumbai. So that shows that, okay, I mean, we are venturing into a completely new area and that we should probably start changing our ways of approaching this new phenomenon.
At least we have discovered this is a common problem again, although essentially in the area of national competences, but as has appeared in other areas as well, through coordination, through consultation, and you mix and you connect competitiveness, as you said, digital society, etc., etc. So I think it's worthwhile to follow these developments and try to connect all these dimensions of our discussion. Okay, I feel a little bit, okay, we still have some time for a cup of coffee. I would like to thank the panelists. I would like to thank our colleague from the Institute for the technical support, and I thank you for attending this interesting meeting. Thank you so much.